The first trouble came from Turl. He had a hangover from his solo binge, and he had been irritated close to anger at the comings and goings and delays. At first light, Johnny began to load them as they arrived singly and in groups from their errands to their homes. The people in the meadow had not left, but had slept on the ground around the fire. No one was going to miss the departure. More Scots, having dismissed and missed the gathering of the clans due to distance and infirmity, had started to come in, and the number had now doubled. Johnny began showing them how to tie down their gear in the military supply lockers of the personnel freighter, and how to fasten themselves into the seats. 2 to a seat and adjust the belts. He had gotten about 6 fully settled, when 2 of them promptly got out of their seats again and started showing newcomers where to stow their gear and how to handle the belts. Some apologized for seeming to bring to so little, but times had been hard and it was no longer safe to read, sorry for the accent, in the lowlands. Some thought perhaps they were bringing too much, but one never knew, did one? Some were a bit late and streamed in, and such a breathless rush. The historian wearily checking off their names. The old woman had come in a clatter of kettles. The parson arrived in a rolling in a keg, in case somebody became ill. Johnny strapped it down tightly, curious. He had never seen whiskey before. The sun was getting higher. Turl roared from the cab, "Get those filthy animals!" Why is everyone Irish all of a sudden? Cockney. "Get those filthy animals loaded!" People became very quiet. Johnny winked at them and relaxed and got loading some more. Finally, they were all there, all 83 of them. Johnny said, "This flight will take several hours. We will go very high, it will be very cold, and the air will be thin. Endure it somehow. If you feel lightheaded, it will be from lack of air. So make an effort to breathe more often. Keep yourselves tightly strapped in. This plane can turn in all directions and even upside down. I am now going to the forward cab to help fly this thing. Remember that one day soon many of you will also be able to fly machines, so observe things closely. Robert the Fox is in charge here. Questions?" There wasn't a single question. He had made them more confident in their new environment. They seemed cheerful, not afraid. "Take it up, McTaylor," said Robert the Fox. Johnny waved at the crowd out the side door, and they roared back. He slammed and locked the door. He settled himself down in a co-pilot seat, wound the security belt around himself twice, put on his air mask, and got out the map. Turl was looking very sourly at the crowd. With vicious sudden gestures, Turl recompressed the cab, breath gas flowing in. He ripped off his mask, and Johnny saw his amber eyes were shot with green. Turl had been going heavy on the cabango. There was an evil twist to his mouth bones. He was rumbling something about late, and having no leverage on these blasted animals. Teach them a lesson. Johnny stiffened in alarm. The plane vaulted skyward at a speed enough to crush him into his seat. It was at 3,000 feet in a blink of an eye. Johnny's map and hands were pressed painfully downwards to the co-pilot control panel. Turl's talons snapped at once more at the buttons. The ship started to roll over on its side. "What are you doing?" shouted Johnny. "I'm going to set an example," roared Turl. "We've got to show them what will happen if they disobey." The thick mob in the meadow was a small dot below them as the plane turned downward. Suddenly Johnny knew that Turl was going to blast them. The ground came screaming up. The crowd was getting large. "No!" screamed Johnny. Turl's talons were reaching for the fire buttons. Johnny heaved the map. Open, it pinned itself against Turl's face, cutting off his vision. The ground was coming up with speed. Johnny hit his own controls with tick-tick-off fingers. 200 feet up, the plane had rapidly changed course to level. Its inertia sucked it down to only yards above the crowd's heads. Like a javelin, it shot forward. Ba-twing! Ahead of them, the trees leaped larger, and the mountainside became closer. Johnny's fingers stabbed at the keys. Branches hit the underbelly. The plane rocketed up to the mountainside, only feet from the ground. It shot into the clear as it passed the mountain crest. Johnny levelled it and stabbed at the and stabbed it toward the distant beaches. He reversed the tape that had taken them to the oncoming voyage and fed it into the autopilot. The sea sped by only yards below them. They were in the clear, undetectable by any mine site observation post, heading for home. Johnny was bathed in sweat. He sat back. He looked at Turl. The monster had gotten a map off of his face. Flames were flickering in his green-shot eyes. "You almost killed us," said Turl. "You would have spoiled everything," said Johnny. "I've got no leverage on these animals." He looked over his shoulder beyond the cab rear wall. "How," he added with nasty sarcasm, "do you intend to keep them obedient?" "With little baby toys. Little baby toys." "They've been obedient enough so far, haven't they?" "You ruined my whole trip for me." He relapsed into a moody silence. At length he rubbed his aching head and fumbled around for his cabango. He brought up an empty container and threw it down. Johnny clipped it into a rack so it wouldn't go adrift. Turl found another one under his seat. He chewed off a slug of it and sat there gloomily. "Why," asked Turl at length, "were they cheering yesterday?" "I told them at the end of the project would see them highly paid." Turl thought that over, then, "They were cheering because of pay? More or less." Turl was suspicious. "You didn't promise any gold, did you?" "No, they don't know anything about gold. Their currency is horses and such things. And also other transvestites." "I pay, yes," says Turl. He was suddenly very jovial. The cabango was taking effect. He had just had a wonderful thought. "I pay." He knew exactly the pay they would be getting. Exactly. At the muzzle end of a blast gun. It cheered him up enormously. "You fly this pretty good, rat brain, when you're not trying to kill everybody." This struck Turl as very, very funny, and he laughed and he laughed and laughed from time to time all the way home. But that was not what pleased him. How stupid these animals were. High pay indeed. No wonder they'd lost this planet. He had his leverage. He'd never had such enthusiasm from a slave. 48 hours after their arrival at the defense base, Johnny was very glad he had Robert the Fox along. He had to handle a threatening war. Two of the young men, amid all the flurry to settle in, had yet found time to discover the remains of a weapons cargo. A truck, in the last days of man's civilization, had apparently run into a road cutback, and a cave-in had covered it. There it had remained for more than 1,000 years, until Scottish hands had uncovered it. Johnny had just come into the base with a good group of driving wild cattle before him. He had been very busy settling the group in. He had lots of help. No one required much in the way of orders, and they had swept out and apportioned off the old dormitory. They had dug latrines, the parson had made the chapel useful, and the old woman had found a place where they could get shagged without any intervention. They could protect the deer and the cattle. Being near water, it was ideal for the vegetable garden. Johnny had used a drilling machine to plough it up, and the women assured him that now nobody would get scurvy. They had brought seeds and radishes and lettuces and spring onions, and their bums would be catered for. And they'd all been growing in no time. With this sunlight and such deep soil, the schoolmaster had appropriated the ancient academic building and had a schoolroom all set up. The Scots had proven remarkably ingenious with machinery. They seemed to know what some of these pipes and wires were all about, having heard of them and read about them in their books. Thus Johnny was not too startled to find a youth, Angus MacAtavish, holding out an ancient piece of metal to him and requesting permission to make this and the rest of the lot serviceable. Johnny thought it was a dildo, but then he thought, well, I don't really mind. All this bustle, anyone would have time to dig up an old wrecked man truck and its contents. What is that thing? Said Johnny. The youth showed him some stamped letters. The object was covered with what must have been very thick lubrication. Grease, that down the ages had become rock hard. Ha ha! and had preserved the object. Well, hey. The letters, which the youth had cleaned off, had said, Thompson, submachine, gun. It had a company name and serial number. There's a case on case of them, said McTavish. A whole truckload and airtight boxes of ammunition. When the grease comes off these, they might be fired. The truck must have run off the road and gotten buried in the caving. May I clean it up and test it, McTyler? Just to point out that most ammunition is made by America and 60% of it doesn't fucking work. So, lasting 1,000 years? I don't think so. Unless it was made by Russians. Johnny absolutely nodded and went on with the castle. He was thinking about getting over to the base and getting a horse. There were plenty of wild horses, but they had needed to be broken. And driving in cattle for food on foot was not the safest occupation he knew of. He was also speculating about using one of these small silo trucks to do the job. Food shortage had been a problem for the Scots, and there was no reason that he could think of that they shouldn't be well fed. It would make them even tougher and more able to stand and work ahead, and fat lazy bastards. He was not prepared for the deputation that came toward him as he finished supper. A mess hall had been set up, and although the women were cooking outside, eating was being done inside, off the broken tables with much eroded cutlery. Robert the Fox was sitting there before him. Angus McTavish held out the weapon to him. It works! We cleaned it and figured out how to load and operate it, and the ammunition will fight. The spring wouldn't be any fucking good. Johnny could see the others in the mess hall were giving him their silent attention. There's lots of these and lots of ammunition, said Angus McTavish. If you climb the hill and look over to the east, off in the distance, you can see the Sino mine site. He smiled evilly. A group could sneak over there tonight and blow them to bits. There was an instant cheer from the rest. Young men from other tables stood up and crowded around. Johnny had a terrible vision of slaughtered Scots and blasted plans. Robert the Fox caught Johnny's eye. He seemed to want a nod, and Johnny gave him one. He stood up. Excuse me. The old veteran was one of the few Scots who had ever seen a silo up close before the freighter had arrived. Raiding for cattle down the lowlands where cattle now wandered amid the ruins, Robert the Fox had once encountered a party of silo hunters from the mine site of Cornwall. The silos had wiped out the other members of the party, but Robert, clinging to the belly of a horse, had been able to flee the carnage unobserved. He was well aware of the power of silo weaponry and the murderous character they exercised. This young man, said Robert the Fox, pointing to Angus McTavish, who was standing there. I'm sorry, I had big piece. Pointing to Angus McTavish, who was standing there holding his man-machine gun. Has done very well. It's a credit to be resourceful and to be brave. The young man beamed. But, cautioned Robert the Fox, it is one of the great wisdoms that one of the best succeeds at what one prepares for totally. One mine site destroyed will end the power of the silos. Not at all. They're not Irish. What am I doing? Fucking Irish accent. I used to live in Ireland. Ugh, disturbing thought. Our war is against the entire silo empire, and for this we must work hard and prepare. He became conspiratorial. We must not wipe out just one base and alert them to... What the fuck was it Irish? I'm about to cockney. That's it. The young man thought it was wise and happily finished their dindins of roasted dindins and steaks. You fat bastards eating all them dead animals. Thank you, said Johnny to Robert the Fox. The precipitated war was averted for the moment. A bit later, in the lingering twilight, Johnny took the older men down to show them the scrunch. He had begun to realize he had a sort of a council. It consisted of Robert the Fox, the parson, the schoolmaster, and the historian. Johnny probed about in the grass, looking for iron bits, and at last he uncovered the almost totally eroded frame of a weapon that might have been similar to the Thompson. It was very hard to tell what make it was, but it had been a gun. Johnny told his council the history of the spot, according to Silo records. They hardly needed to get to the point. They got the point. Such weapons had not stopped the silos. Then the historian, Dr. McDermott, looked about curiously. Beware the remains of a tank. It defeated them, said Johnny. Now that is very odd, said the historian. Not that they defeated here, but that there is no rusting remains of any silo battle equipment. This was a defeat. The silos may have suffered damage, maybe not, but they would have taken any damaged equipment away from the field. No, said the historian. Excellent. And he told them about a handwritten romance in the university library about a similar battle. It had occurred on a line between two ancient villages known as Dumbarton and Falkirk, fairly large cities. In the narrowest point above where England and Scotland had once met, just below the Highlands, and the remains of silo tanks can be detected there to this very day. That's true, said Robert Fox. I have seen them. The historian said, no silo has ever come north at that point. Not until you, McTyler. Not until you flew up in your demon. It is the only reason we can still exist in the Highlands. Tell me more of this romance, said Johnny, feeling homosexual. Oh, it's quite badly written, said the historian. A curiosity, not literature. I'm still going into the Irish accent. I've not a fucking clue why. Have you got Father Ted? No, I don't, Dougal. It was scribbled by a private in the Queen's Own Highlanders, who were all English, who escaped north from the battle. A sapper, I think he was. They handled landmines. Landmines, said the Parsons? Mines for ore? No, said the historian. I think they used the word mine for explosives. Buried in the earth, and when the enemy crossed them, they exploded. The private used the term tactical nuclear weapons. He goes on about how a fragment of a regiment that had been in bunkers escaped the garrison and withdrew north. The captain had, I think, had a girlfriend in the Highlands, and they had laid a string of mines from Dumbarton to Falkirk. Silo tanks in pursuit hit them, and the mines exploded. The silos were not out of tanks or troops. They simply withdrew south and never came back to recover the dead, or to get their equipment. The romance says it was due to the spirit of Drake intervening, for drums could be heard. Wait, said Johnny. Those were nuclear weapons. Whatever those are, said the parson, also being Irish apparently. Uranium, said Johnny. Uranium! No, it's titanium. Uranium. There must be a band of uranium dust between those two towns. He explained to them about the silo breathe gas. FYI, uranium does not hang around. It gets washed away with rainwater. Asked Chernobyl. Aye, it fits, said Robert Fox. The historian looked enlightened and drew his shabby cloak around his shrunken shoulders. It sounds like the magic ring of fire, or the geometric signs the creatures of the netherworld dare not cross. Johnny looked at the eroded remains of the weapon in his hands, and then along the trench. These poor men didn't have any uranium. Didn't even really know about the silos. All they had were these. They died like brave men, said the parson, removing his cap. The others also removed theirs. We just have to be sure, said Johnny. We don't wind up like them. Aye, said Robert the Fox. Johnny laid the remains of the gun down and they walked back thoughtfully toward the cooking fires. The wail of a piper was soft in the night wind, so Johnny shot him in the fucking... Turl was working with maps on the mountains. He had the latest recon drone pictures of the load, and he was trying to find any trails or roads that came near this deep gash. It's like my ex, she was Irish, she had a massive deep gash. It was an awfully difficult operation, and when he thought about the animals undertaking something that would make an experienced silo miner cough, it put spots in front of his eyes. The site was simply not accessible by ground travel. His newly acquired secretary, came in. She was stupid enough not to be a menace, and good-looking enough to be, decorative. She got drunk with economical speed, and then, of course, she had other advantages. Her utility was in blocking off callers and shuffling administration papers back for somebody else to handle, since he was now in reality the top silo on the planet. He shouldn't be bothered with trivial details. Overload the already crushed nymph. That was his new motto. The animal is here to see you, she shrilled. Turl had hastily covered up the maps with his paws touched the door. He scraped them into a top drawer and out of the sight. Send it in. Wearing his air mask and clothing of chinko cloth, Johnny came in. He had a long list in his hand. Turl looked at him. Things were working out pretty well. The animal was on his good behaviour, despite having no button camera surveillance anymore. They had an arrangement whereby Johnny would come over every few days and take care of food for the girls and have a chat with them. Johnny had suggested a radio link, but Turl had become very cross and adamant. No radio. That was final. The animal could walk his feet up if he wanted to say anything to Turl. Turl knew there were plenty of receivers in the mine site, and radio might tip his paw and blow his security. I have a list, said Johnny. I can see that, says Turl. I want piping, chinko cloth, and the tools to cut and sew it together, and some pumps and some shovels. Give it to Jerk! Oh, just give it to her. You sound like you're rebuilding the whole defense base. Typical animal. Why don't you get busy with machine instruction? I am, says Johnny. And it was very true. He had been spending 10 hours a day with the youths and the schoolmaster. I'll send over Kerr. Johnny shrugged. Then he indicated the list. There's a couple of items here that, well, they should be cleared with you. The first is the chinko instruction machines. There are about 6 of them in the chinko quarters. The equipment controls are, well, they're all in silo, and so are the manuals. I want to take those and all their discs and books. So, the other item is flying trucks. You got flying platforms? I think we should have some flying personnel carriers, flying trucks. I've been to see Zit, and he's got a whole garage floor full of them. To Turl's suspicious mind came the sudden feeling that the animal was looking through the desktop at the maps in the drawer. It was very true that there were no roads to that place. All carrying, he realized, would have to be done by air, and it would be a difficult flying at that. But a flying truck or a personnel carrier had the same controls as a battle plane, just fewer guns. There was a hard rule that no alien race could be trained in battle. Then Turl thought of the inaccessible load. Well, a mining truck, it's not really a battle plane. That was for sure. Besides, he controlled the planet, and he made the rules. How many do you want? Hey, you found 20? And tribal ground cars, 3 ground cars. The order was to train them on equipment. If I haven't got the equipment. But 20? Johnny shrugged. Maybe they're hard on equipment. Johnny barked a sudden laugh as he remembered the animal nearly going over the cliff in that burning blade scraper. It took it in pink. Purple. He drew out one of the blanks, numped the sign, and punched the animal's list in above the signature. How much time have I got? Asked Johnny. Turl was too secretive to come flat out with times. The times actually coincided with a semi-annual firing of personnel and dead silos. He calculated rapidly. 9 months total, maybe 3 months for training, next transshipment, 6 months for mining, to the second early spring next year, blah, blah. Better give it an edge. 2 months to get them all trained. That's awfully fast. Turl took the remote control box out of his pocket and tapped it. Johnny frowned, his face mask obscuring the dangerous light that had leaped into his eyes. He took a tight hold of his temper and voice. I could use Kerr to help ferry this stuff. Tell Chirk. Also, I need some experience operating over those mountains. The updrafts, downdrafts, they're very strong in the winter. They'll be a lot worse. I don't want you getting an idea if I fly around up there. Turl put his paws protectively on the desktop, as if he was trying to block the view into the drawer. Then he realized he was getting jumpy. Still, the longer he kept things in the dark, the less chance there was of the animal taking and talking to other personnel. He began to weave an elaborate fantasy to explain to the others why animals were flying to the mountains. You seem to know an awful lot, animal. Only what you told me. When? Different times, like when over in Scotland. Turl stiffened. True, he had been unguarded, very unguarded. If this stupid rat brain had picked it up, if I hear one leak about the real project through Kurt or anybody else, excuse me, he tapped the control box in his pocket. The smaller female is going to have a collar explosion. I know that. So get out. I'm far too busy for all this chatter. Johnny had Chirk copy the requisition on a duplicator and asked her to call Kerr to help ferry the equipment. Here you are, Animal, she said when she was through and handed him the copies. My name is Johnny. Mine is Chirk. She batted her painted eyebrows. You animals are kind of funny and cute. How can you be so much fun to hunt like some of the employees say? You certainly don't look dangerous, and I don't think you're even edible. Crazy planet. No wonder poor Turtle hates it so. We're going to have a huge house when we get home next year. A huge house, says Johnny, looking at this rattlebrain in wonder. Oh, yeah, we're going to be rich, Turtle says so. Ta-ta, Johnny. Bring me a sack of goodies when you have a favour next time. Thank you. I will. He went out with his warehouse-sized list to get busy. He knew he had to get a new piece of this puzzle into his brain. Turl would not be here for more than a year. Turl was going home, and going home rich. I am sorry, gentlemen, Johnny said to the council. They were seated on some bashed-up chairs in the combined quarters and office, a spacious room that overlooked most of the area, chosen because it had holed windows. Johnny pointed to the stacks of books. I have searched through everything I can find, and I am unable to locate it. Robert the Fox, Dr. McDermott. The parson and the schoolmaster sat glumly looking at him. He never tried to fool them about anything. One thing about McTaylor, he was honest with them. Things had been going well, too. Almost too well. The young men were progressing marvelously in their ability to handle equipment. There had been only one casualty with the flying trucks. 2 trainees had been attacking each other's trucks in the air in simulated combat, and one of the young lads had punched the wrong button at the wrong time and had hit the ground. He was lying in the infirmary right now, leg properly set by the parson and attended by the clucking old widows. The flying truck, according to Kerr, who came over to fix it, was fit only to be candlelized. Stop for a break. Need a drink. The 3 young men who looked like Johnny had bruised hands from the schoolmaster's ruler. The schoolmaster kept them at the instruction machines from dawn to noon. They went off to study with vehicles. They were learning silo under heavy pressure, but they weren't doing it very well. Several young men had caught wild horses and broken them to ride, and they rounded up wild cattle and shot deer, so there was no lack of food. Radishes and lettuces were brightening up their fare, proud trophies of the old women's gardens. In fact, everyone was working like fury, and the place looked like an ant-hill all day long. Perhaps, said Dr. McDermott, we could help you look. He gestured at the books. If you'd like to tell us exactly what it is we've been looking for. It's uranium. The key to this battle is uranium. Ah, yes, said Dr. McDermott. It isn't harmful to humans, but deadly to silos. It is harmful to humans, said Johnny, pointing to the toxicology text. Given too much exposure to it, some humans die rather frightfully, but it apparently ignites the breathe gas of silos and makes it explode. It is uniformly fatal to them. What, nice gin. These mountains, he continued, sweeping his hand toward the mountains outlined by the sunset behind them, are supposed to have been full of uranium. I know definitely. The silos believe they are. You can't force a silo up into them. And that demon Turl, he's going to send us up there because I don't want to stir them up. The recon drone flies daily, but one day soon I must find a way to move them. Have I skipped a page? Sometimes the punctuation is a bit shit on this. There we go. Skip the page. The demon turtle was going to send us up to those mountains to find, probably, gold. He has undoubtedly spotted some. We may or may not mine the gold. Probably we will have to keep going. But we could also be mining uranium. And you can't locate any, said Dr. McDermott. There's even a list of uranium mines, but they're all marked mined out, mine closed, that sort of thing. This is actually quite true in today's date, which is 2024. Practically all the uranium on the planet, radioactive materials, is in Russia or China. The rest of it's all gone. It must have been very valuable, said Robert the Fox. They list a lot of uses for it, mainly military. The parson rubbed his nose thoughtfully. Where's your own village people know anything? No, said Johnny. They're one of the proofs that there is uranium up there. That's why I've not taken you gentlemen there, much as I would like to. I'm certain their illnesses and inability to reproduce have a lot to do with uranium and being gay. It doesn't seem to affect you, McTyler, smiled the parson cheekily. I wandered a lot, and I moved around a lot. I was not home much of the time, and some of the affected, well, it affected more others than it did to me. Maybe. I'm not sure. Heredity, said Dr. McDermott. Over the centuries, some of you may have developed a resistance or an immunity. They would not know. I haven't gone up there, and I don't want to stir them up. The recon drone flies daily, but one day soon, I must find a way to move them, and a place to move them to. No, they would know nothing about uranium, or they would have long since quit that valley. We do have to solve this problem. It is the centre of my every plan. Dr. McDermott held out the hand. Deal these books around, so we may as well put ourselves a bit of use. You go and get some sleep, and we'll give you some aid. Johnny started handing out the books in rotation. I think, said Robert the Fox, we should send out some scouts. It is basic, the planning of any successful raid, that one sends out scouts first. How do you recognize this uranium? The indicators are there in the mine book, said Johnny, but the main tool we do not have is called a Geiger counter. And though I've looked it up and have a vague idea of how to make one, the point is we don't have one. Perhaps, said the schoolmaster, there may be one in some of those old villages. Do we have directories for factories? I doubt such an instrument would be worth much after 1,000 years, said Dr. McDermott, but apparently the machine guns are. But I do see there is a... Goodness! But it had almost gone to pieces. A telephone book to Denver telephones? It used to exist for all the cities. A telephone directory. Here, instruments, international business, machines, research. Oh, drat, the address can't be made out. The writing exists on many buildings there, said Johnny. Robert the Fox leaned forward. As I say, it takes a scout. Scout before the raid is the watchword. We must be very careful that the demons do not suspect us of snooping around. They have body heat detectors, said Johnny. That's how you escape them, by clinging onto your horse and sucking his cock. They knew horses were running away, but the recon drone takes only pictures. And one should get far under cover when he hears the rumble far off. The sound of a ground car, however, means real danger, for they have spinners that fly up into the air and look for heat. I have some covers that we can throw over ourselves to block the heat, but we have to be careful, very, very careful. I think it's best that I go. No, said Robert the Fox, his accent thickening up into dialect from the sudden alarm. We can't be doing that, my laddie. The rest of the council also shook their heads. The parson said, You keep yourself safe, McTyler. That's why we're here, to help you. The small demon, the one that came to fix the flying machine, the very same. His name is Krrr. He told me an order had been issued. He said by the planet's head to forbid all hunting parties in this whole area and to restrict them all to the mining areas and the compound. There was some talk, and Kerr said, well, he's going to come over here for a bit of sport. So there aren't any demons wandering around, and it's perfectly safe to go up to the great village on a scout, just so long as we don't stay in sight of the recon drone. Scouts, said Robert the Fox firmly, are not done by chiefs. Raids, perhaps. Scouts, no. We will send young Angus McTavish. All those in favour? And Johnny was firmly voted down. Thus it was a young Angus McTavish went scouting to Denver in a small ground car, and in the dark that night he was very preoccupied. My gin is very nice. He was peculiarly adept at operating machinery. He had taken piping and brought the water closer. He had worked out how the water mains and sewers worked. He had even gotten a couple of inside toilets working. To the amazement of his friends, they could now shit in a closed room instead of out in the open with fresh air. He was gone 48 hours and came back with lots and lots of wonders to report. But the International Business Machines Research Laboratories were in ruins. They bore no fruit, unlike my mushrooms. There was nothing there for even vaguely resembling the Geiger counter that had been described to him. He had also located a Bureau of Mines, but it only decayed records. He discovered a prospector's outfitter, and though he had found some stainless steel sample picks, and he brought them back and an assortment of stainless steel knives that truly delighted the old women in the work. There had been no Geiger counter there either. I'm sorry for the Irish accent. It's just, I don't know. It's just weird. The council met again and grimly decided to carry on and get ready anyway. And the parson said a prayer that pleaded with the good Lord to have pity upon them and lead them somewhere, anywhere, somehow to a Geiger counter and uranium. They also decided to send out more scouts, but without too much hope. Johnny awoke in the middle of the night to the abrupt realization that he knew where a uranium detector existed. The ore duster at the transshipment area. He had even spent apprentice time on it. So despite Robert the Fox's prohibition about his scouting, Johnny was on a scout, dangerous or not. Every few days he saw Chrissy. Each time he did, he made a habit to ride around the mine site idly just to accustom the silence to his being there. He would sit windsplitter and wander around. Today Chrissy and Patty looked very forlorn. Johnny had brought fresh meat and some more deerskin for them to tan and sew. He had cut plenty of firewood. One of the Scots had unearthed a stainless steel axe from a village ruin and made it such good work. It worked so well. He placed all this outside the wooden barrack to be taken in when Tura was not busy, and then he could come out. It was frustrating to talk through the wooden barrier and the cage bars. Chrissy and Patty held up some buckskin shirts and breeches for him to admire, and then repackaged them all for him to take. He called to them that they looked fine. Patty exhibited a new arrangement for their pitiful shelter. They could fasten nothing to the bars, and he said it looked so much better. What was he doing? They wanted to know. He said he was working, and was he all right? Well, yeah, he was fine, and things were going well, just fine. It's difficult to carry on a conversation across a space of 40 feet through 2 screening barricades and under the surveillance of at least 2 button cameras. Difficult to be calm and reassuring when what he really wanted to do was blow the place up and get them out of here. Well, he is American. He had a picture recorder on a strap around his neck. With a couple of buckskin thongs, he had staged it to his chest, so with a slight motion of his hand, he could start and stop it without raising it to his eye. He had practiced doing that and had gotten pretty accurate at pointing it without looking through the finder. He requisitioned a dozen other things and plenty of miniature discs, and he took pictures of the girls, perv, and the cage from several angles, pictures of the switchbox and the wires. It was a risk, he knew. He told Chrissy and Patty he would be back soon, and rode casually to a high point above the Chinko quarters. Seemingly idle, he took broad panoramic views, both wide-angle and telephoto, of the mine site. He took pictures of the 20 battle planes lined up in the field, the distant cartridge fuel dump, and beyond that, the breathe gas storage dump. He took pictures of the morgue 100 yards beyond the transshipment area, and he covered the freighter landing area and ramps and conveyor belt and control tower. Then luck. He saw a freighter on its way in with a load of ore. He idled down off the knoll, and as he passed the cage, he felt a sudden need for cautiousness. He dismounted and slipped the discs he had already taken into the waiting pack, making it appear that he was just arranging some flowers. Remounted, he wandered on down to the ore dusting area. He let Windsplitter pause near some tasty clumps of grass, and at last he came to the dust-coated area of transshipment. The freighter had not yet unloaded. Employees were coming out and getting into the machines. He rode up onto the ore dusting machine. The operator was not there. A hook was swinging from a crane, and he pretended to duck under it, but in actual fact he leaned over and pulled out a wire from the back of the machine's controls. He didn't know what circuit it was, but with his luck, he would know very soon. The operator knew him slightly from his appearance days and his apprentice days, but glanced at him with normal silent disdain. "You better get that horse out of here, or is it coming in?" Johnny backed Windsplitter off. The freighter discharged with a dusty roar. The blade machines raced about neatening up the pile. The first load was ready for the buckets on the conveyor belt. A red light flared. A horn went off. The ore duster operator cursed and banged at his controls. All activity stopped. The air around the operator's dome and mast might as well have turned blue from his casting. Char came rumbling out like a tank from the dome, from the transshipment control office, shouting as he came. Far off was the faint moan of another freighter, coming in from an overseas mine site. It was not a transshipment firing day, but schedules were about to be ballsed up on freighter discharge. Char was shouting for electronics repair, and somebody in the dome on loudspeaker systems were screaming for help, and was demanding to know where the duty electronics were. Johnny could have told them where the duty electronics were. He'd seen the employee walking toward the compound 15 minutes ago. Char was raving at the operator on the ore duster. The operator was hammering paws on the control panel. Johnny slid off his horse and went down to them. "I can fix it." With a roar that had concussion in it, Char told him to get the fuck out of there. "Nah, I can fix it." A voice coming closer said, "Let him fix it. I trained him." It was Kerr. Char was distracted by the new interruption. He whirled to storm abuse at the midget silo. Picto recorder running, Johnny slid up to the front of the ore duster control panel. He snapped it open. He stood at right angles to the layout of the components and pretended to study it. Then he reached in and touched a couple of points, doing nothing to them. Given pictures like this, he could rebuild it. He closed the box. He rapidly connected the wire he had earlier loosened. Char turned back to him after chomping on Kerr. "It's fixed," said Johnny. "It was just a loose wire." Kerr yelled to the operator, "Try it now!" The operator did, and the ore duster purred. "See," said Kerr, "I trained him myself." Johnny got back on Windsplitter, using the motion to turn off his Picto recorder. "It's working now," said the operator. Char looked venom at Johnny. Too much gin. "You keep that horse out of this area. If this was a firing time, he'd land in silo." He went off muttering something about damned animals. The conveyor belt and buckets and machines were roaring away again, making haste to clear the load before the new freighter came in. The old one took off and flew away. Windsplitter wandered down toward the morgue. This building, remarkable for its refrigeration coil, stood well back. Johnny turned, and when he looked at it from back at the compound, it was a straight course from here across the transshipment platform and uphill to the cage. "And what," said a voice, "are you doing down here with a Picto recorder?" It was Turl. He had stepped out of the morgue and had a list in his hand. In the dark reaches of the building, coffins were stacked. Turl had been checking silo corpses scheduled for return home at the semi-annual firing. "Practicing," says Johnny. "For what?" says Turl. Sooner or later, you're going to want me to take pictures for you up in the... Don't you say a word about that around here. Turl tossed the list back at him and stood toward the morgue. He stepped close to Johnny. He yanked the picture recorder off Johnny's chest, snapping the holding straps. The thongs bit into Johnny's back as he resisted just before they gave. Turning the machine over, Turl snapped the disc out of it, threw it in the dust, and stamped on it with his boot heel. He poked sharp talons into Johnny's butt and flipped out 4 more discs. They're just blanks. Turl threw those into the dust and ground them under a heavy toe. He shoved the picture recorder back at Johnny. It's a company rule not to record a transshipment area. When you want me to take pictures, says Johnny, I hope you'll be able to make them out. I better be able to, snarled Turl, illogically, and stamped back into the morgue. Later, when Johnny was let out to give Chrissy her supplies, he had no trouble slipping the earlier discs from his incoming pack into Chrissy's outgoing pack. You don't want to get those two mixed up. That's how babies are made. But they've worked the circuit diagrams that would detect uranium. Out of a plain revenge, that night he showed the whole crew the earlier pictures he had taken. He showed them all the locations of the transshipment area. He'd have to do it again later when he got proper plans were formed, but for now he wanted to show them pictures of Chrissy and Patty. Jailbait, and even more jailbait. The shots showed the girls, showed the collars, showed the switchbox to the bars, but mainly it showed their faces. Oh, but it did. The faces of a little girl and a beautiful woman, just. The Scots watched the pictures, attentive to the geography of the transshipment area, the battle planes, the breeze gas dump, the fuel dump, the morgue, and the platform. But when they saw the pictures of Chrissy and Patty, they began with pity and ended with rage. Robert the Fox had to speak again to prevent them from tearing over their right now and ripping the place to pieces. The pipers played a mournful lament, and so they buggered him again. If the Scots had been enthusiastic before, they were deadly determined and angry now. But Johnny lay unable to sleep that night. He had had it right in the camera, the circuit for a uranium detector. He had not memorized it. He had counted upon the pictures. He blamed himself for depending upon machines. Machines were all right, but they did not replace man. Pfft. There's plenty of women that disagree. There would come a day of reckoning with Turl. He vowed it bitterly. In the clear, cold noon they were on the way back to have a look at the load. Johnny, Robert the Fox, and the 3 who had looked similar to Johnny, and the 2 Scot remaining shift leaders. What the hell? Did we skip stuff? No, we just... I apologise, I didn't write the book. We go from them just starting to learn how to use machinery, and all of a sudden they know where the load is, they're going to the load, and they're all experienced, and they've got shift leaders. It's almost as if they skipped a chapter. Anyhow, Part 7, Chapter 6. In the clear, cold noon, they were on the way to the first look at the load. Johnny, Robert the Fox, the 3 who looked similar to Johnny, and the 2 Scot mining shift leaders who had been appointed sped along the small personal carrier, high above the grandeurs of the Rockies. Turl had come early that morning, threatening, and secretive. His ground car had been spotted some time since by a posted sentry, and Johnny had been warned. Wrapped in a puma skin against the dawn chill, Johnny had met the ground car as it stopped. Breakfast was just over in the mess hall, and a warning had been sent to stay inside. The grounds were nearly deserted, and there was nothing to distract Turl's attention. He got out, tightening his breathe mask, and stood there, tossing the remote control box idly into the air and catching it with his paw. Why, says Turl, are you interested in a uranium detector? Johnny frowned and looked mystified. Well, I tried to. I heard after you left the other day that you repaired the ore duster with a picture recorder around your neck. Right. Johnny decided on a sudden verbal attack. You expect me to go up into those mountains without knowing what to avoid? You expect me to go tearing around, getting myself wrecked, physically wrecked from uranium contamination? See here, animal, you can't talk that way to me. Well, you know very well that if I could be made sick if I don't avoid uranium dust, you told me there's uranium up there, and you expect me. Whoa, what are you talking about? Mining toxicology, snapped Johnny. The kilted sentry who had caught him by standing by the mess door, looking daggers and dirks at Turl. Sentry, shouted Johnny, grab a book. Any book in English, bring it here, fast. Johnny turned back to Turl. The running footsteps of the sentry could be heard inside the building. Turl put the control box back in his pocket so his gun pull could be free, just in case. The sentry rushed out with an ancient volume labelled The Poems of Robert Burns. He had snatched it from the parson who was reading it for breakfast. It would have to do. Johnny snapped it open. He put his finger on the line that said, Wee slicket coiny timity the beastie. See there, he demanded the Turl. In the presence of uranium, a man's hair falls out, his teeth fall out, his skin develops red blotches, and his bones crumble. It happens in just a few weeks of exposure. You don't explode then? It doesn't say anything here about explosion, but it does say continuous exposure to uranium dust can be fatal. Read it for yourself. Turl looked at a line that says something about, Oh, what a panic's in thy breasty. So it does, I don't know that. You know it now, says Johnny. He closed and thumped the book. I found this by accident. You didn't tell me. Now, are you going to let me have a detector, or aren't you? Turl looked thoughtful. So your bones turn to dust, do they? And it takes a few months. Weeks, says Johnny. Weeks? Turl began to laugh. His paw dropped from his belt gun, and he swatted himself in the chest, catching it. But wow. Well, I guess you'll just have to take your chances, won't you? It hadn't worked, but Turl was totally off the scent now, actually feeling more secure about himself. That wasn't what I came over for. Anyhow, so, can we go someplace a little bit less public? Johnny handed the book back to the sentry. Give him a wink to reassure him. The Scot had enough sense not to grin, but Turl was rummaging around the ground car. He beckoned Johnny to follow and took him back to the chapel, where there were now no windows. He had a big roll of maps and photos, and he sat down on the ground. He motioned for Johnny to hunker down. Your animals are all trained, he said. As well as can be expected. Well, notice you had a couple of extra weeks. That'll do. All right now. We have to come to the time to be real miners. He rolled out the map. It was a patch-up of sectional running shots from a recon drone, and it all condensed about 2,000 square miles of the Rocky Mountains from Denver to the west. You can read one of these? Yes. Turl snapped the head of a canyon with his hand on it. It's there. Johnny could almost feel the surge of greed in Turl. His voice had a conspiratorial tone. It's a load of white quartz with streamers of pure gold in it. It's a freak, exposed by a landslide in recent years. And he took a large photograph out of the pack. There it was, a diagonal slash of white in the red side of a canyon. Turl took a closer shot and showed it. Fingers of pure gold could be seen threading through the quartz. Johnny would have spoken, but Turl had his paw up to stop him. You fly over that, you take a close look at it. When you've seen it and gotten it orientated as a mining problem, you come back and see me, and I will clarify any questions as to procedure. He tapped the location on the larger map. Memorize that spot. Johnny noted that the map bore no markings. Clever Turl. No clues if the map went adrift. He sat there and let Johnny study the map. Johnny knew these mountains, but he had never had a detailed picture from this angle before, from above. Tyrrell put all his papers away except the map. You hold on to that. How long do we have to get it out, says Johnny. Day 91 of the coming year. That is 6.5 months away. That's also winter. Tyrrell shrugged. It's always winter out there. 10 months of winter, 2 months of fall. Yeah, fly over there and look at the animal. Take a week. Take 2 weeks. Study it out. Then you come over and we'll have a private meeting. And this is confidential. Do you hear? Outside of your animals, say nothing. Tyrrell had gone off playing catch with the control box. His ground car roared away back to the compound. A couple of hours later, Johnny's party was flying high above the Rockies. That's the first time, said one of the Scots behind Johnny, that I knew Robbie Burns was toxic. Johnny turned. He thought the sentry must have gotten abroad. You speak sorrow that well? Of course. And the Scot showed the ruder bruises on the back of his hand. He was one of the lads chosen because of his resemblance to Johnny. I was putting air to a window on the second floor above you. He can't understand English, can he? One of our very few advantages. I didn't get the uranium detector. Well, says Robert the Fox, is a very optimistic man who thinks he can win all the battles. What were all those villages down there? It was true. There were old towns here and there throughout the section of the mountains. They're deserted. I've been to some of them, but there's no population, just rats. Mining ghost towns. 'Tis a sad thing, says Robert the Fox, all this space, and all kinds of food and no people, and over in Scotland there's little space that will grow anything and hardly any food at all. It's a dark chapter in the history we've been through. We'll change it, said the young Scot behind him. Aye, said Robert the Fox, if you have any luck in this great broad world of our food and no people. What are the names of these grand peaks down there? I don't know, says Johnny. If you look at the mind map, you'll see that they just give numbers, no names. I think they had names once, but people forgot. That one over there, we just call it High Peak. Hey, said the young Scot, the sheep down that mountainside. I'm shooting a hand telescope. You're not fucking them now. Wait till you get home. They're called bighorns, says Johnny. It's quite a feat to hunt one down. You can stand on a ledge no bigger than your hand and sail off and land on another one, not wider than 2 fingers. You put 2 fingers in a goat. And there's a bear, said the Scot. That's a big one. That's what the bear said. The bears were good in hibernation, Sue, said Johnny. I'm surprised one is out at this attitude. Some wolves are following him. Laddie, said Robert the Fox, we are hunting bigger game. Keep your eye out for that canyon. Johnny spotted it shortly before 1 o'clock. It was a startling sight. The grandeur of the scene and this thin, cold air made one feel small. Well, cold air will make it feel small. Out of the river, a thin silver thread in the depths far below, reared a reddish, massive wall of rock, rising sheer and raw. Narrowly across from it with an echoing face, down through eons the river, finding a softer strata between the 2 faces, had gnawed its turbulent way to make at last this gigantic knife slice in the all but impregnable stone. I'll get it pregnant. 1,000 feet deep, 100 yards wide, the enormous wound gaped. There's my ex again. All around it rose majestic peaks. She did have majestic peaks, hiding it from the world. The sparkling white line of quartz, many feet thick, marked it with a brief diagonal line. In all that quartz embedded was pure gold, shone and beckoned. It had in its reality a much greater impact than any photograph. It was like a jewel band set upon the wrinkled skin of a hag. My ex again. One could see far below where a portion of the cliff had fallen off. The fragments lay like crashed pebbles in the depth. The river had eaten too deep under the cliff, and an earthquake had shaken a slice of face loose. Snow had not yet fallen, for the year was dry, and there was nothing to impede the view. Johnny dropped the plane lower. Then the wind hit them, funneled up the long gorge, Compressed and screaming to get free, the turbulent torrents tore at the cliff. With fingers racing across the overlarge keys of the console, Johnny fought to keep the light personnel plane in position. It was not a dazzling load at the moment. It was a brutal, elemental wall that could crush them if they touched it. It's like my ex's girlfriend. Johnny leaped the plane 1,000 feet up, clear of the updrafts, and steadied it. He turned to one of the Scots, the one who looked like him and who had spoken of Burns. His name was Donaldine McSwanson. Can you handle this plane? Donaldine came forward. Rob the Fox went to a rear seat and strapped himself into the co-pilot seat. In these teleportation drives, there were a number of corrections that had to be constantly watched. Some were built into the computers, some were pre-programmed for any flight. Space itself was obsolete and motionless, having no time, energy, or mass of its own. But to stay in one place relative to the mass around one, it was necessary to be parallel and track of such mass. The world turned daily, and that was near 1,000 miles an hour correction. The Earth orbited the Sun, and that required second-to-second correction. The solar system was processing, and even the correction was minute. It had to be compensated for. The whole solar system was en route to somewhere else at a blinding speed. The universe itself was twisting in relation to other universes. These factors and others made controls of the ship a dicey business in normal times. Down there in that canyon, it was a nightmare. The irregular external buffetings of the wind upset the inertia of the motor housing and made instant shifts of the coordination continual. Donaldine had been schooled and trained in all of this, but he had seen Johnny's fingers flying over that console and knew it was no routine flight. In the first place, the solid keys allowed for wide talons and wider pulls, and it required a snapping tension of the wrist to compensate for these spacings with human hands. Donaldine looked down at the canyon top. It is no Roman in the gloamin', but I can try. He flew down. Johnny unwrapped his seatbelt and had them pass a small contrivance called a core gun to him. By firing a small rotating borer gun, the gun would take a 1-inch diameter chunk from the rock face. The length of the core varying by how long one let the borer stay before hauling it back on a line. With it one obtained a cylindrical tube, sample of a vein of rock. Start taking pictures, he yelled at the rest of them. They had 3 picture recorders aboard. An instrument that measured depth below surfaces, one that measured densities while drawing a platform. The instruments were light silo protecting tools, but being silo, they required a lot of muscle. The Scots took the equipment and began individually operating through the slots in the sides of the fuselage. I'm sorry, too much gin. There's no feeling of how long they were training. I'm assuming it was a couple of months at least. Take it in close at the vein as you can get without risking us. Aye, said Donaldine. There's the rub. Ready? Down we go. They shot back down into the chasm. Thanks. Johnny could hear Donaldine's fingers on the console keys. They sounded like a miniature of that Thompson machine gun. Then the sound was blotted out by the shrieking howl of the canyon wind. My ex when she's farting. They swerved. The wall came close within inches and swept back to yards. It danced up and down, in and out. The scream of the motors began to match the wind as they raced to correct their positions. Johnny forced himself to concentrate. He wanted a core on that first shot, for it took time to rewind. The sparkling load danced and leaped in his sights. He pressed the trigger. With a bark and a sizzle of paying out line, the core hit the load. Bang on! He triggered the rotor. The line whipped up and down in the wind. The plane suddenly slid sideways in a sickening swoop and almost hit the opposite wall. The core came out and dangled below the ship. Johnny reeled the looping, twisting line within. Take her up, he shouted. Donaldine vaulted the ship up 2,000 feet to quieter air. He sat there, limp, his arms and wrists aching. I'm not going to comment about... Yeah, okay. He sat there, limp, his arms and wrists aching. Sweat heavy upon his forehead. Oh, mon, 'tis like wanking in the morning. 'Tis like dancing with the devil's wife, he panted, relapsing to dialect. Did you get your readings and your pictures? Called Johnny over his shoulder. The instrument men had gotten their depths and densities, but those operating the picture recorders, struck by the awesome scene and seeing much more of it to take in, said no, they wanted to have another crack at it. I'll take it, says Johnny. The devil's wife, said McDonaghy. Now, McTyler, I've a feeling I'll be dancing this tune on my own again. I'll keep her, thank you very much. Now, what do you want to do? They wanted to slide debris at the bottom of the canyon. I hope you all made your peace with the parson before we left. Here we go. They plummeted to the bottom of the gorge and made a pass. The boiling white froth of the river fanged at the fallen fragments. They were primarily underwater. The plane fought back up the narrow gorge slowly till the pictures were taken. They could track on both sides. Donaldine's hands were a blur on the controls. The bucking ship screamed as its motors over-revved. Something is getting hot, called Robert the Fox, and it was becoming warm in the cabin despite the altitude. It was the motor housings, overworked and compensating for the lunging and changing inertia of the ship. They drew the opposite cliff, and Johnny looked at it, but the picture recorders were busy. There were no flat surfaces up there, nowhere to put down a ship. There was no space where one could operate a lower drilling platform. It was all pinnacles and clefts. Johnny saw something else and caught a vertical shots down the cliff face. The cliff was not vertical. It fell away inwards. Anything lowered from above would hang 15 to 20 feet away from the face of the cliff. How could one hope to rig oar nets? They went directly above it, and Johnny saw something else. Shoot more verticals at that top, he said. Yes, now he saw it plainly. There was a crack inside about 30 feet from the top of the edge of the cliff. Parallel to it, another such crack has caused the fall of the rock that bared the load. But here was a second one, just waiting for another earthquake. The whole load would pitch and go into the gorge. They went up to 2,000 feet, and the picture recorder operators had to be content with the general scenery. It was impressive enough in its gigantic beauty. My ex. By your leave, McTyler, said Donaldine. If it's home we're going now, I'll exchange with Thor. Johnny nodded, and a near duplicate of him, who was nicknamed Thor due to his Swedish background, slid over to the seat top and matched his motions to Donaldine's. He then took over. Donaldine dragged himself back to the rear. Is he really a bit fast for the paper, he said. Are we going to be operating in that? The core in Johnny's hand was part white quartz and part gold. It was a very pretty thing. This was the lore that had wooed Turl, that had given them their chance. He wondered how many lives it would take. Head for home, he said to Thor. They were very quiet on the way back. Johnny was very edgy as he walked Windsplitter around the mine site. He was doing it as casually as he could. What he was doing was dangerous, but one could not have told it from the easy way he sat his horse. It was semi-annual firing day, and the personnel at the mine site were hurried, harried, snappish, and preoccupied. Johnny had a picture recorder hidden in a tree that overlooked the site, and he had a remote control hidden in his pouch. He had gotten a long play disc from the recorder, but that would not permit it to run for hours. Hopefully it would run for hours unattended. He had to get all the data he could. Robert the Fox would not have approved, for this was a scout, pure and simple. And if Turl spotted the picture recorder or detected the remote, there could be repercussions. Johnny had delayed reporting to Turl, taking advantage of the week or so order. And then he had heard by accident of this semi-annual firing from Kerr, the Chatterer. Kerr had come over to Johnny's request to inspect the personnel carrier motor. Johnny needed the data. If it was faulty, that was one thing. But if it was only underpowered, well, then the job alone, that was another. So Kerr come to the base, growling a bit about it. He was an operations officer, not a mechanic. But, well, Turl had sent him. The midget Silo's temper was sweetened, however, by Johnny's handing him a small gold ring a scout had found. Well, it was on the corpse of a finger. Why are you giving me this? Says Kerr suspiciously. Souvenir, said Johnny. Not very valuable. It was valuable. It was a month's pay. Kerr dented it with a fang. Pure gold. You want some, don't you? No! I've got two, so I gave you one. We've been shaft mates quite a while now. This was a silo mining term for a pal who pulled one out of a cave-in. We have, haven't we, says Kerr. Besides, I might want someone killed. This sent Kerr off into a gale of laughter. He appreciated a good joke. He put the ring in his pocket and got busy on the motor. Half an hour later, he came over to where Johnny was lolled in the shade. Nothing wrong with that motor. If it got up, it was just being overridden. You want to watch it, though. You keep running one that hard, and it will go up in smoke. Johnny thanked him. Kerr hunkered down in a building shade. They talked, mostly Kerr just chattering. Kerr got on the subject of being pushed by schedules, and Johnny easing casually with his question. What happens on day 91 of the new year? Where'd you get that from? Saw it posted on the mine site. Kerr scratching his greasy neck fur. You must have read it wrong. That would be day 92. Happening in just, 7 days, you know. It's a lot of bother. Something different about it. Oh, you must have seen a couple when you were in that cage down there. You know, semi-annual firing. Johnny may have seen it, but at the time he didn't know what the fuck he was looking at. He put on a stupid face. It's a slow firing. No war. Personnel coming in, personnel going out, including the dead ones. Dead ones? Oh, yeah. We're shipping dead silos home. They want them accounted for because of pay, and they don't want them looked at by aliens, I'm guessing. Nutty company rules, lots of trouble. They put them in coffins, hose them down in the morgue, and then, crap, Johnny, you've seen the morgue. What am I telling you? Better than working. Yeah, that's true anyway, isn't it? Anyway, a slow firing means a 3-minute build-up, then on a semi-annual day, the whole planet sends in the personnel, then they hold a tension between here and home planet. And a couple of hours later, we fire off returning personnel and dead bodies. You know, he continued, you don't want to fool around on an ordinary transshipment day. I see you around on that ore sometimes. Ordinary firings is all right for dispatches and ore, but a live body would get ripped up in the transition. You'd come apart. On a slow firing, the bodies come through great, live or dead. If you're trying to get a silo, Johnny, don't do it with the ore. He laughed and he thought it was funny. A human, breathing air built for light gravity. You wouldn't last 2 minutes on silo. Johnny laughed with him. He had no intention of ever going to silo. They really buried those dead bodies on silo. Sure enough, names, markers, everything. It's in the employee contract. Of course, the cemetery's way out of town and some old slag heap and no one ever goes there. But it's in the contract. Silly, isn't it? Johnny agreed that it was. Kerr left in very good spirits. Remember to tell me who you want killed? And he sort of rode off with gales of laughter and drove off in his old truck. Johnny looked up to the window above him, where Robert the Fox had been running a recorder out of sight. Turn it off. It's off, said Robert the Fox, leaning out and looking down. I think I know how Turl's going to ship the gold to Silo. In coffins. Robert the Fox nodded. Aye, in all heads. He'll load them here, and then most likely when he goes home, he'll just dig them up for some dark silo night when nobody's the wiser. What a ghoul! And so Johnny, sitting astride a wind splitter at the firing site, was making very sure he had all the data on semi-annual, just in case it was needed. The incoming load was arrived, and Turl was rumbling around getting things organized. He had medical personnel and administrative clerks waiting to receive the incoming employees. He was very sure there would be quite a few, for a nymph was in pocket with every new worker, and he had said he was bringing in a lot of employees. The network of wires around the staging area was being checked out by technicians. A white light went on. Johnny, sitting a wind spreader up the slope, touched his remote to start the concealed picture recorder. A red light flashed over the operations dome. It began to flash faster. A horn wailed, a bullhorn roared. "Stand clear!" The wires started to hum. Johnny glanced at his silo watch, big as a turnip, on his wrist. He marked the time. There was a building roar. Trees began to quiver from ground vibration. An electrical pulse beat in the air. All employees had withdrawn from the platform. All machines and motors were off. There was nothing but that growing roar. A huge purple light over the dome flashed on. The platform area wavered like heat waves. Then 300 silos materialized upon it. They stood in a disorderly mass. Their baggage, breathe gas helmets were on their heads. They staggered a trifle, looking around. One of them dropped to his knees. An intermittent white light began to pulse. "Coordinates holding!" the bullhorn roared. MySite Medical rushed in with a stretcher for the one who had collapsed. Baggage carriers arrived and converged on the platform. Administrative personnel rushed to the newcomers into a solid mass on the field and then got them into a snake line. Turl had a list from an incoming executive and began to pack down uniforms for weapons and contraband, working fast, a detector in one hand, playing on baggage. Turl occasionally extracted an item and tossed it into a growing pile of forbidden articles. He was working very fast, like a huge tank, battering away at the line, dislodging odd bits from it. Personnel people were sorting new employees toward freighters or towards the berthing sections of the compound. The newcomers looked like half-asleep giants, accustomed to this sort of thing, paying little heed, not even protesting when Turl took things away from them, not challenging any of the assignments of the personnel people, not resisting, and not helping. To Johnny on the knoll, this mass of creatures were in discreditable contrast to the Scots, who were interested in things and alive. Then Johnny came alert. Turl was about 2/3 down the line. He had stopped. He was looking at a new arrival. Turl backed up, then suddenly gave away for the rest of the line to pass on. He didn't inspect any more. He let everybody through. A few minutes later, the newcomers were in a compound barracks, or sitting and waiting personnel carriers to go to the other mine sites. The bullhorn roared, coordinates holding, and linked in second stage. The white light on the dome began to flash intermittently. The personnel transport started up and took off. Johnny realized that the interference was being held down on the coordinate frequency. Knowing what he did know now about teleportation, he realized that motors could not run during a firing. It was an important point. Teleportation motors interfered with the teleportation in transshipment. That was why silos didn't locally transport ore on the planet from one point to another, but used freighters. A small motor was one thing, but teleportation of ore was reserved for transport between planets and universes. Apparently, if any motor were running around the transshipment area while those wires were humming and building up, it would mess up the firing due to overly disturbed local space. Johnny knew he was now watching a holding between the space of Silo and the space of this planet. The secondary holding was just keeping coordinates punched in, and he could visualize the operators in that same control tower punching consoles with the technical claws to keep this planet and Silo lined up for the second firing. It was in the second one that Johnny was interested. It apparently would not take place for a while. He turned off his picture recording remote. After a wait, he timed it and found it was 1 hour and 13 minutes. The white light of the dome began a very rapid flashing. The bullhorn bawled. "Stand by for return firing to Silo." A semi-annual seemed to use up far more electricity. Technicians had auxiliary bus bars closed to the high poles. There was still a faint hum in the air. Sweepers rolled and whirled all over the firing platform, cleaning it, getting rid of any scraps of new personnel may have dropped. Johnny noticed that the conveyor belt detectors were not manned. and all the ore apparatus was standing still, neglected. He had hoped to pass by the ore duster with his sample from the load in his pocket and see whether or not the ore duster registered any uranium mixed in with the gold, but he couldn't. It wasn't even running. Turl came rumbling down toward the morgue. Johnny turned on his picture recorders. Sailors were getting busy again, running around the firing platform, the bullhorn board, coordinates holding and linked with the second stage. They were still lined up with Silo. Johnny envisioned that far-off planet, universes away, purple and heavy like a huge discovered boil, infecting and paining the universes. He knew there were scraps in its space right in front of him, linked to the space of Earth. Silo, a parasite larger than the host, voracious, pitiless, without even a word for cruelty. Turl was now opening up the morgue. Small lift trucks dashed by him and into it. Turl stood there watching, a list in his hand. The first lift truck came out. Turl looked at the closed coffin number and checked his list. The truck with the huge coffin borne in its claws sped to the firing platform and dumped its burden with a thud. The coffin teetered and then fell flat. A second truck came out of the morgue with another coffin. Turl read the number and checked it off, and that coffin was carried up and dumped on the firing platform. Then rapidly a third and fourth truck repeated the action. The first truck was bringing another coffin out. Johnny watched while 16 coffins were piled, this way and that, carelessly on the platform. A line of returning personnel were dropped off in a flatbed ground truck and with their baggage next to Turl at the morgue. He went through their clothing and glanced into their effects. There were 12 of them. As they finished, the lift trucks moved them from the baggage onto the firing platform. The white light went steady. Coordinates on first stage, brought the bullhorn. Motors off. The 12 departing silos stood there, or sat on their mounds of baggage. The 16 coffins were mixed up with the baggage. It suddenly struck Turl that nobody waved or said goodbye. It meant nothing to anyone here that these creatures were going home. Or maybe it did, he thought. Looking more closely, the machine operators moving around, they seemed to be moving with more savage jerks. One couldn't see well into their helmets or at this distance, but Johnny felt they resented the homegoers. A red light over the operations area began to flash. A horn wailed, the bullhorn board. Stand clear! The wires began to hum. Johnny glanced at his watch. The tree leaves quivered. The ground vibrated. The hum of the wires gradually increased and slowly built to a roar. 2 minutes went by. On went the purple light. And a wavering haze appeared over the platform. The personnel and coffins were gone. Then Johnny noticed an undulating wave of sound and a quiver in the wires. It was almost like a recoil. A different horn went off. A white light flashed. The bullhorn roared. Firing completed. Start motors. Resume normal actions. Turl was locking the morgue. He came rumbling up the slope. Johnny turned up his picture recorder remote and started to move off. Turl seemed to be very distracted, but the movement caught his eye. Don't hang around here. Johnny guided the horse toward him. In a low guttural, Turl said, You must not be seen around here any more. Now clear out. What about the girls? I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. I wanted to give you the report. Shut up, says Turl. Was he frightened? He drew close to the horse's shoulder, bringing his eyes to the level of Johnny's head. I'll come over and see you tomorrow. Hereafter, don't come near this place. Yeah, but I go over to your car. Get to your base right now. And Turl made sure that he did. It took a very dicey scout that night to recover the picture recorder from the tree. But with a heat shield to prevent detection, Johnny did it. What was up with Turl?